Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's such an honor. You have such an amazing story. I was just telling you that I heard you on the Rich Roll podcast, and I was like, hot damn, I got to get this guy on.
Mm.
He has so many good stories.
Yeah.
Um, but I kind of thought we would start at the beginning a little bit. Maybe you can, maybe, where would be fun to start? I heard you telling a story about how you had just done a Sports Illustrated photo
Mm.
shoot. I think you were about 18, and you walked into a dorm room with a bunch of stuff there. Why
Mm.
don't we start there? What was that first experience
Well,
like?
I think it's important to talk about those experiences because I do think when it comes to substance use, I think, we are so heavy on the worst day and the outcome at the end rather than understanding the why and the beginning. And I was an 18-year-old kid and I grew up in a house that suffered from alcoholism. My parents at that time were actively going through a divorce, probably 10 years too late. And I didn't walk on that campus, although I was extremely talented and focused around basketball. I wasn't well, emotionally. And I really didn't have an anchor to myself socially. So sadly, that night was pivotal. I walked in that room and there was cocaine on the table, and I grew up a Celtics fan, and the legend of Lenny Bias, one of the best basketball players to ever live, that he did cocaine one time and he lost his life, and that story was very real to me, and I still did it, and I still took that chance. And again, that moment, that night at 18 years old, opened doors for me that, I'm still shutting.
Mhm.
Although I'm 15 years sober, um, that night is still a big part of my life.
It's so crazy to think that you had so much going for you at the time, and like you had a lot of pressure, a lot of
Mm.
people counting on you, a lot of expectations for you to perform, and facing that choice of this might kill me and then choosing to do it anyway.
Sad, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
now obviously in this era of fentanyl, um, it's that much more powerful for kids who are making that decision to go one time. Um, but again, in hindsight, I look at that moment in my life, and there was an enormous amount of pressure on me at 18. Um, but the truth is, there was a ton of pain, right? There was a ton of
Yeah.
pain in my life that was unresolved, and a lot of moments that I needed to heal from. And my parents did the best they could, and with my dad struggling, obviously my mom, uh, she struggled with him. He was the alcoholic and she was the wife and the mother, and there wasn't a lot of time for healing in the house. There wasn't a lot of moments to reflect and say,
Mhm.
let's move past this. So I brought a lot of that with me to at 18 years old to a college campus. And I tell people all the time, I mean, and people who've never done cocaine, really, it's hard to understand it, but cocaine, I had such a relationship with it because cocaine allowed me to communicate openly and like really pour my heart and soul out. And it would be 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be sitting in a dorm room, and I'm talking about my childhood, and I'm talking about all the pressures I'm facing. And it just it it, it literally brought a sense of peace over me. And
Yeah.
and that's what I fell in love with cocaine. That was the relationship I had with cocaine. Because it wasn't looking forward to partying, to going to nightclubs. I truly looked forward to just talking and
Yeah.
talking openly and honestly.
Yeah. You were saying for those of for those listening who haven't done it, I think the majority of the people listening to my podcast probably do. And I remember I was probably a little younger than that the first time I tried it. And
Mm,
it was like suddenly, and I was hanging out with a cheerleader from high school, and I was like a freshman, and she was like a senior, and I thought we were going to be best friends forever.
totally. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
was like this, but it was the sharing. It was
Yeah,
the open-hearted sharing. And I had never felt connected to anybody like I had when I was in that moment.
totally. Yeah,
And
yeah.
what a relief to be able to share.
Mm,
And that's, when I hear you talk about that, I was like, oh, it was the sharing. And I would imagine
mm,
it sounds like you grew up in a rough neighborhood. And I
mhm.
would imagine that men and boys are not really encouraged to share their feelings. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess
No,
that's kind of
there
obvious.
was there wasn't much of that, right? I
Yeah,
grew up in
yeah.
a very competitive house. I grew up in a, and again, I don't, my parents did the best they could,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
my parents were really young when they had my brother and I, and they didn't have the skill set.
No.
They didn't have the skill set to kind of walk me through the process and obviously let's sit down at the dinner table and share how we feel. There was
Feelings.
never I never had those moments. um but
Yeah.
but again, it was the as soon as I did it, I
Yeah.
knew this was allowing me to connect and to share
Yeah.
and to be transparent and honest. And like any the people who've done it, obviously we can laugh at it, but I would say things, and as they're coming out of my mouth, I'm looking at people's reaction, like their jaws are dropping. Like, why are you unloading this on me? I don't want to take this from you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but there was a sick sense of healing in that process for me.
Yeah. It's so interesting how it's such a paradox sometimes because it's
It
like the
really
drugs and
is.
alcohol bring relief from the pain.
Mm,
And in a way, it helps us survive those
mm,
really crazy times. But then that thing that saves you begins to kill you at some point.
mm,
Um, why don't you walk me through, maybe man, you had some, I was listening to that podcast and you had some
mm,
crazy stories. Can we talk a little bit about your experience of, when you were in Turkey and
mm.
you went to
Yeah.
go get a package?
Yeah. Turkey was tough. It was, I had traveled to Italy the year before. I went through withdrawal in Italy.
Brutal.
And I
That
I
was
was
heroin
introduced,
withdrawal?
yeah, I was introduced to heroin in Italy. And I decided that I was going to play the following year in Turkey, right? And I grew up with Midnight Express and that whole
Right.
movie. And that's honestly my childhood and my teen years. That's what I thought Turkey was, Midnight Express.
Right.
And I got this beautiful job in this beautiful place in Istanbul, and but I went empty-handed because I was so afraid of Midnight Express, and
That's
and
fair.
I yeah, and I said to myself, you know what? Like I was able to hustle heroin on the streets of Italy. Like I'll find what I need in Turkey, but I didn't right away, and obviously in a panic going through withdrawal, I made arrangements for a drug dealer to send me some OxyContin, and it's going to help me get through the first until I'm able to find what I need on the streets of Istanbul. And I was I was so looking forward to that day. I had been so sick for probably 3 weeks. My
Wow.
body was completely shut down. And I got a phone call. I got a phone call that I had a package. And right there, red flag. They're contacting me thinking, like, why are they just not delivering it to the address? So, right there was a red flag. And I had a decision. Do I go get the package that has probably $5,000 worth of oxys in it? Or do I just say I'd never expected a package and leave it? Um, you know, Everything was telling me just let this one go. Take this loss, let them have it. You have children, I mean, like, what are we going to do here in Turkey when they find out you're smuggling in um, Oxycontin into their country? So
Oof.
I went down. I went down. I walked in. I went with a staff member from my professional basketball team, and I stood at the counter, and I'm standing at the counter, and I said my name, and I gave my passport, and they went in the back, and I saw this man come around the corner, and he has my package, and it's wrapped in tape. So right there, I'm saying I'm done. They went
Like it
through
had
it.
already been open?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Oh,
definitely,
shit.
definitely open. And it was one of those moments. I had a split second. Do I just say I'm out and I'm going to walk away, or do I receive it? And the power of addiction, right? I stood there with the hopes that, you know, they haven't found out, they haven't found it. He handed me the package, and I signed for it, and I got in the car. And when I opened it, someone in Boston went through it at the airport, and obviously it didn't. They saw something in the package, and they went through it, and there was a little note in there that whoever found it knew who I was, and basically expressed to me that I need help, and that if it wasn't for them taking the pills out of the package, I could be in prison. So it was just one of those moments of, the depths of addiction that we're willing to go, and the chances we're willing to take, and on the edge. And that was one of those moments for me.
That
Sad.
is so crazy. Yeah, it is
And
sad.
again, I tell this story, but as I tell it, there's two little children, two little babies at my house, crawling around on the floor, and their daddy's jumping in a car to go get a package in Istanbul, Turkey, that possibly in his heart, he knows that I could be in handcuffs in 25 minutes. And yet, I said goodbye to my family. I jumped in the car, and I went for it.
Just the powerlessness you must have felt
Oh,
over.
it's awful.
I mean, you had no choice. That's the pull of
Mm,
addiction, is that you lose
mm.
the ability to choose.
But again, it was that moment of receiving a phone call that told me run. Um, when I saw tape wrapped around it, everything said run. Um, and I didn't. I stayed in it, and with that little hope that I'm gonna open that package, and it's gonna be there for me.
Yeah, just that's total insanity.
It is insanity.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have, listen, I know you have lots of stories
Mm,
along those lines, but I really feel like that one highlights like the
mm,
insanity of addiction. What was like the turning point for you? It sounded like there were time like it took a minute. It took a
yeah.
minute and many experiences to finally have that ability to stop forever.
Mm.
I would imagine there are multiple turning points, but what happened that you were able to be sober for 15 years now?
Yeah, I like to think that it was a beautiful collection of tough
Yeah.
moments that brought me
Yeah.
to this 15 years. Um, but I was 32. I was, in the middle of a horrible, horrible heroin addiction. And now, um, I had transitioned in my 30s to vodka because I didn't have enough money for the hustle of heroin, and cheap
Yeah.
vodka. Um, vodka shut my noise off, and vodka helped me forget. And at 32 years old, I was drinking vodka and mixing in heroin when I could, and I overdosed, and that was my fourth overdose, and I was walking out of a hospital, and a nurse intervened in my life, and she said, "I want to help you." And she knew my mom, and she watched me play high school basketball, and she brought
Mm.
me back. And my mom had passed away years earlier. And she she hugged me and she brought me in back into the hospital and advocated for me. Um, I wish that was the time that I stayed sober from. It wasn't. But she put me on that path to one, go through withdrawal and detox, two, to transition to a treatment center. Um, and being in that treatment center for like 35, 40 days and going home to witness my little boy Drew, to be a sober father. And that was my first sober birth. And I
Oh,
was so
wow.
proud. I was so like, finally, I can tell people that I was really present, right? Like you hear people talk about these, when you hear people talk about it, for me personally, um, I didn't get it. I was so numb for the first two, that I really didn't understand it. And that moment I did, and I was so proud of it. And unfortunately, I started drinking that night and getting high that night, and fortunately was able to go back to treatment. And when I walked into that treatment center, there was a counselor there who said to me, "What do you think about playing dead for your family? Like why don't we why don't we sit down with your wife and kind of construct this story that you died in a car accident and let your kids kind of let go of you, and when you finish at this treatment center, you jump in a car and you drive as far away from your children as possible." And thank God that stuck with me. I went to bed many nights and many painful nights on a pillow thinking, what am I doing here? Like I shouldn't be in this house. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be their dad. They deserve a better dad. Um, so that was my internal voice always. But hearing him say that and making that suggestion to me, um, it it flipped me. It really did. It was a moment that I said to myself that night, you're either going to do the work or you're going to die. And you're going to have to fight through this process or you're just going to succumb to it. And, and I've been sober since. And that man, no therapeutic class would tell you to make that recommendation to a patient. But I'll say this, as painful as it was what I needed at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably wouldn't pass the vibe check at
One,
the treatment
one,
center.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
totally.
man, how powerful that is to give you that visualization. And that was like a real option at that point,
Oh, it was a
like,
total option. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I was so close to that option.
yeah.
And I lived on that line for so long. And
Right.
I had a coach who used to tell me, one day you're going to sleep with a soft pillow. And I never really connected the dots on that. And he said, Christopher, I hope when you get older, your pillow is soft. And I finally figured out what a soft pillow feels like in recovery,
Mm,
because every night I went to bed on a hard pillow, and
yeah.
recovery has given me that cushion, that comfort to fall asleep to. Um, and for many years I went to bed on a hard pillow, and I knew that uh, I wasn't I wasn't the dad that they needed. I wasn't the
Yeah.
husband, the son. But thankfully, right, sobriety is a superpower,
Yeah.
and I see it in my kids' eyes today. And
Yeah.
those children um that I was ready to run away from, they sobriety is written all over their face. And I tell people all the time, you have something special when you see your sobriety in the people who loves you's eyes, and it's really cool.
That
Smiling eye.
is so
Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah, that is the truth serum, right? Because kids will not BS you for sure.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Um, we have a few minutes left, and I would really love to hear about the type of work that you're doing today. I know you
Mm.
speak to a lot of kids, and there's a lot of, parents, I'm sure, that are listening to this. Tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. So, for like the last 12, 13 years, I've traveled the country, telling this story. And, ESPN kind of gave me a platform. And when I did the documentary Unguarded, it kind of launched me into this advocacy, prevention space, sharing my story. Um, but it kind of evolved into my primarily my audience is young adults and young children. And I think, for years I would just tell my story, and I would walk out of that school and I would get emails from kids saying like, what a beautiful story. Um, but I would never get their story. And I
Mm,
think as a person with this opportunity, I wanted to bring out their story. And the way I thought of it was to talk about the first day, to talk about the emotion behind adolescence and early teen years and growing up in that self-esteem and self-worth and fitting in socially and all of that. And so I did a segment on the morning show with Gail King and Charlie Rose, and it's called Note to Self. And um, they told me I had 500 words and I had to write a note to my younger self. And I really never communicated with my younger self.
mm,
Um, I recognized them, but I never really communicated with them. And
yeah.
and when I wrote that note to myself, which was extremely painful and exhausting, at that moment I said to myself, I have to find a way to talk about my first day with children where they can identify. And, I think as a parent of a 24 and 22 and a 15-year-old, um, I think it's important to understand their why. I think it's important to understand inside of them. When kids walk into the house and you feel or you suspect they're under the influence, 95% of the parents want to know where they got it, who gave it to them, who bought it, how much did you do, what did you
Mm,
do,
mm.
and parents don't ask their children why. And I get in front of kids today and I ask them why, and I ask them to ask themselves why. So, what the work I've done, I do about 200 speaking events a year, and I've done it for over a
Oof.
decade. It's beautiful. I love it. It's kind of like where I want to be, where I belong. Um, and then I started a foundation that has helped a few thousand people get into treatment and supported them financially to get the gift that I was given. And Herren Project has given close to 10 million, $8 to $10 million in the last decade of people who,
Amazing.
who who couldn't get into treatment and or didn't have the resources or ability to get in. And I sit here today and I'm 6 years into Herren Wellness, and I got a front row seat to a bunch of newcomers who are living at my center. And there's no greater gift, right? I mean, they're the
Yeah.
most important person in the room, and I get to be in the room with them every day when I'm home. And I'm really proud of this place. This place is something special, and I created something um, that I believe people deserve, and the care and the attention and
Amen.
and the family and so at 15 years sober to be involved at this level, and again have that front row seat is pretty awesome.
That's really special. You're doing amazing work. And I just really appreciate, man, I appreciate the hustle. 200 speaking engagements, dude, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
It is a
Oh,
lot.
that's a
And
lot.
we kind of dialed it back a little bit. It was actually more at one time at
Like
one
a
time.
like a typical alcoholic, all or
Yeah,
nothing.
totally. We're going.
Going hard.
More is
Even
better.
more is better. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Listen, thank you so much for your
of
time
course.
today. You're doing amazing work. It's just so
Thank you.
inspiring, and keep up the good work and sharing the story. And God bless you for
God
those
bless you too. Thank you so
200.
much.
You have a great
I'll
day.
see you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank